I was childhood sweethearts with him. Someone asked him when he would marry me. But he said, "Don't be kidding. I've always regarded her as my younger sister." The next second, he officially announced his girlfriend. I let go. And there was a partner for an arranged marriage by my side. He didn't care and said, "Scarlett, this trick won't work. I have no feelings for you." Later, at my engagement banquet with someone else, he went crazy with jealousy. His eyes red as he begged me, "Scarlett, I like you. Please come back to me. Okay?" I touched the engagement ring on my hand and smiled at him, saying, "Don't be kidding, brother." There was a gathering of friends tonight. After a few rounds of drinks, Chen Feng, heading fulfilled by Adsai, who was the closest to Blake, pushed his elbow and said jokingly, "Blake, lekadasai. It's almost been a year since you two graduated. When do you plan to marry Scarlett?" Actually, I also really wanted to know the answer to this question. He and I were jokingly engaged in a baby betrothal by our families since we were kids. Over the years, although we didn't explicitly establish a romantic relationship, we only had each other by our sides. Gradually, heavily, the two families turned the joke into a serious matter, just waiting for us to get married after our careers were stable. Even I myself believed that our relationship would definitely bear fruit. But when he heard Chen Feng's words, he was stunned for 2 seconds. He turned to look at me and then smiled, saying, "Don't be kidding. I've always regarded her as my younger sister." Younger sister? My smile froze on my face, and I stared at him blankly, once thinking I had misheard. Just then, his phone rang. He winked at us and said somewhat mysteriously, "I have someone very important. I'll introduce her to you all today." After saying that, he picked up the phone and walked towards the door. The next second, someone pushed the door open, and a girl I didn't expect walked in. She had a little makeup on her face, dressed in a pure and clean outfit, still looking like an innocent and harmless little white flower as before. "Blake." Blake reached out his hand to her, with a doting look in his eyes, and led her in front of everyone. "Let me introduce to you all. This is my girlfriend, Cecilia." There was a deathly silence at the scene, and the surprise of our friends was obvious. After all, anyone would have thought that he and I were about to get married. In fact, it wasn't just them who were surprised. I also really wanted to know how Blake suddenly got a girlfriend. And this girlfriend was actually the person I disliked the most during the 4 years of college, Cecilia. I didn't say anything, but I saw Cecilia walking up to me with a big smile on her face. "Scarlett. Long time no see." From an angle that only I could see, she winked at me triumphantly, and a hint of a provocative smile flashed across her face. "You two know each other?" Blake came up and put his arm around her shoulder. Cecilia resumed her gentle look and said, "Yeah. We're really familiar." I really had no interest in watching her act like a coquettish girl, so I stood there expressionlessly. The atmosphere at the scene was a bit awkward. Chen Feng coughed twice uneasily and asked, "Blake, haven't so blai. When did you get a girlfriend? Why didn't we know about it?" Cecilia answered first. "We met 3 months ago, but we really got together on the day of Scarlett's birthday not long ago. I wasn't feeling well that day, and he took care of me all day long. I was really touched, so I got together with him. I was stunned. On my birthday, I made an appointment to meet him, but I waited for him in the CAF all night, and he only sent me a message, 'Something came up. Let's make it another day.' I thought at that time that there was an urgent matter in his company, which was why he stood me up without any reason. Unexpectedly, hadn't fulfilled YXI. It was for such a big thing. I knew that Cecilia definitely chose that day on purpose to confirm her relationship with him. Because in this way, every year on my birthday from then on would be their anniversary of falling in love, perhaps remembering the incident of standing me up that day." Blake's face looked somewhat embarrassed. Seeing this, Cecilia took Blake's hand and leaned her head on his shoulder, saying, "By the way, Scarlett, Blake missed your appointment because of me that day. I apologize to you on his behalf." Hearing this, Blake turned to look at her, and there was a tender look in his eyes. I suddenly thought everything in front of me was a bit ridiculous. Actually, At the beginning, I didn't take the baby betrothal seriously. But over the years, Blake has always cared a lot about me. When I was a freshman, someone confessed to me, and he happened to see it. Before I could say the words of refusal, he had already put his arm around my shoulder and smiled at the guy in front of us, saying, "Sorry. She's already taken." Later, I asked him why he helped me refuse right away. What if I liked that guy? I still remember what he said that day. He said, "Student Scarlett, you can't have forgotten that you and I have a baby betrothal. How can you like someone else?" 3 months ago, the model of my clothing studio suddenly backed out at the last minute. I asked him, who was tall and had long legs, to come and help as an emergency measure just for fun. Unexpectedly, he really put aside his company affairs to help me. I asked him if it would delay his work. He pinched my face lightly and said with a smile, "In my heart, nothing is more important than you." It was because of things like these that I took our engagement seriously. Over the years, I have refused many people, just to be able to go from wearing school uniforms to wearing wedding dresses with him. But his words today, regarding me as his younger sister, erased all the previous ambiguity. Not only that, but he also got a girlfriend quietly, which caught me off guard. It's impossible to say that I'm not angry. But in the end, I didn't say anything and turned around and left directly. Not long after, I received an anonymous text message on my phone. "Scarlett, I told you that I won't always lose to you." I didn't need to guess. I knew the text message was sent by Cecilia. As she said, I'm very familiar with her, because we were college roommates. Actually, we got along quite well at the beginning. But ever since the senior she had a crush on rejected her on the grounds that the person he liked was me. She distanced herself from me. Later, she lost to me in several campus competitions and appraisals for honors. And she began to hold a grudge against me. Throughout the 4 years of college, she regarded me as a competitor, targeted me everywhere, and always wanted to outdo me. Unexpectedly, after graduation, she was still persistent in wanting to defeat me. So I wasn't sure for a moment whether she really liked Blake or just regarded him as a tool to win over me. In the evening, Blake called me. "Scarlett, now that you know I have a girlfriend today, aren't you happy for me?" I thought it was ridiculous when I heard this. "Blake, are you playing dumb on purpose?" He was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the phone. And then he sighed and said, "Scarlett, she's different from you. Her family background isn't good. And she has to rely on herself for many things. Although she's confident and optimistic, she really has it hard and needs me a lot of the time." I was a bit speechless and said coldly, "So, are you doing charity work?" He was choked by my words and couldn't say anything. It took him a long time to say, "Anyway, she's more suitable for me." Remembering Cecilia's provocative smile and that intimidating text message, I couldn't help but say, what if she's just pretending? What if she's only with you to take you away from me? Hearing this, Blake's tone suddenly turned cold. "Scarlett, since I've chosen to be with her, I won't doubt her. Also, hadin so land sashun. You and I aren't really engaged, so there's no such thing as taking me away. In the future, don't say those words that will cause misunderstandings." Blake's words were like a sharp sword piercing my heart. The feelings I had for him over the years instantly became fragmented. After that phone call, we seemed to have disappeared from each other's worlds. The next time I saw Blake was at a charity auction dinner a month later. He was wearing a high-end customized black suit and holding a wine glass, standing not far from me. Cecilia, in a red dress, was also by his side. He accidentally caught a glimpse of me, and his expression on his face instantly froze. And he quickly looked away. It was Cecilia beside him who kept looking at me with a triumphant expression. I ignored them and socialized on my own. After a while, Cecilia couldn't hold back and walked up to me. "Scarlett, what does it feel like to have the person you like taken away?" She leaned close to me and sneered in a low voice. I smiled indifferently and said, "You have more experience in this than me. Why are you asking me?" She was hit where it hurt, and her brows furrowed tightly. And she put on a disdainful look again and said, I don't like Blake at all. If it weren't to make you angry, I wouldn't be with him. I was really shocked by her shamelessness and said, Cecilia, aren't you afraid that I'll tell Blake what you said? She sneered and said, he won't believe you. After all, he likes me, not you. I held back the urge to splash the wine in my hand on her face and said through gritted teeth, Cecilia, you're so disgusting. Get as far away as possible before I lose my temper. Just then, Blake walked over. Cecilia instantly acted like an award-winning actress, looking on the verge of tears and saying, Scarlett, I didn't mean to steal Blake from you. I really like him. Please don't be angry. Okay? Seeing this, Blake's face darkened. Scarlett, I don't know what you're thinking, but since I already have a girlfriend, you'd better put away those thoughts that you shouldn't have. I never knew that Blake could turn into an idiot when it came to love. I was so angry that I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I heard a nice voice coming from behind me. What thoughts? Scarlett, aren't all your thoughts on me now? I turned around, and a man whose appearance was comparable to that of a celebrity walked towards us. His eyes were cold and aloof, and he exuded an air that kept people at a distance. He walked up to me, looked at me for a moment, and then put his arm around my waist. The person who came was Hector. He was the partner for an arranged marriage that my father found for me after learning that things between Blake and me had fallen through. I didn't expect to meet him here. What's more, I didn't expect that he would take the initiative to come forward and help me regain my dignity. Blake looked at Hector's hand around my waist, and a layer of frost suddenly appeared on his brows and eyes. He glanced at Hector and asked me unhappily, Scarlett, who is he? The warmth of Hector's palm came through the thin clothes, making me a bit nervous. But I still composed myself and said calmly, what does it have to do with you? Blake was stunned for 2 seconds, looking gloomy. Cecilia noticed that Blake was in a bad mood and quickly took his hand, saying, Scarlett, you found a new partner so soon? Could it be that you just found a stand-in on purpose to provoke Blake? Her words seemed to show concern, but in fact, every word was filled with ridicule and sarcasm. Blake stared at me with dark eyes. After a long time, he sneered and said, Scarlett, this trick won't work. I have no feelings for you. I looked at the two of them in front of me like they were idiots and said, Blake, let out a lol. Sorry. Did I ever say that I like you? Please don't try to seek attention from me. Thank you. After saying that, I took Hector's hand and left. There was the sound of a wine glass shattering behind us, mixed with Blake's angry shout, Scarlett. I didn't stop. He was no longer the Blake who used to dote on me and care about me. And my steps moving forward wouldn't stop for him anymore. I didn't let go of Hector's hand until we were out of sight of those two people. I thanked him with a slightly reddened face. He looked at the hand that he had just been holding and smiled faintly. Did you come here alone today? His deep eyes landed on my face, and his thin lips parted slightly. Yeah. He curled his lips and said softly, then would you like to be my female companion? I was taken aback for a moment and couldn't help but nod. Then, I suddenly understood the intention of my father's insistence that I come to this auction dinner. After the auction started, Blake seemed to be competing with Hector. Whenever Hector bid for an item, he definitely had to compete for it. In the end, Hector only managed to get a diamond brooch in the shape of a musical note. On the contrary, Cecilia was holding a jewelry gift box that Blake had bid for her in her arms, and she was smiling brightly. In fact, over the years, I rarely let Blake spend a lot of money, because the operation of his family's enterprise was not in a very good state. When he first took over, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a broken capital chain. It was only because I begged my father to lend a hand that the company was able to be revived. So, every time he wanted to give me expensive gifts, I would politely decline. Later, the operation of his company got better and better. But instead, he lost the intention to please me. It turned out that a sensible girl wasn't necessarily going to be cherished. After the dinner party ended, Hector drove me home. When we arrived at my doorstep, I was about to get out of the car, but he stopped me. I saw him pick up the dime and musical note brooch that he had just won from the side and gently placed it in my hand. This was bid for you. Please don't refuse it. A few minutes later, I was holding the skirt of my dress in one hand and the brooch gift box in the other. I stood in a daze in front of my home. Even after his card disappeared from my sight, I still didn't snap out of it. The summer night wind blew across my face. In the wind, I remembered the first time I met Hector. Half a month ago. In order to get the order for customizing the dresses for the celebrity awards ceremony, I went to Shinken in person to discuss the business. Shinken is one of the top 3 talent agencies in the capital city, Kyoto, and it has many top-tier celebrities. As long as I could design a dress for one of them for the awards ceremony, my high-end custom dress studio would surely become famous overnight. However, the female manager in charge of the relevant business at Shinken was haughty and had no intention of giving me a chance at all. I returned home feeling disappointed, but I bumped into someone's arms at the door of the negotiation room. When I looked up, I saw a man who exuded an abstinent aura and had an extremely outstanding appearance and figure. After he saw my face clearly, there seemed to be a flash of surprise in his eyes. Although I vaguely felt that he looked familiar, I left without saying anything. Unexpectedly, a week later, I met him at home. Only then did I know that he was the president of Shinken, Hector, and also the person my father intended for me to marry into his family. No wonder the female manager suddenly called me after I returned to the studio that day, saying that she was willing to cooperate with me, and her attitude had become polite and respectful. In fact, I had heard some rumors about Hector, the president of Shinken. It was said that he was capable, good-looking, and single. Yet he was a cold and aloof iceberg who was indifferent to women. Countless daughters of the high society in Kyoto wanted to win him over, but they were all deterred by his cold and proud attitude. It was really shocking that such an eligible bachelor actually intended to marry into my family. However, I still hadn't gotten out of the shadow brought by Blake and had no intention of considering anything else at all. My father said that he wouldn't force me, but he secretly arranged an encounter like tonight for me. The next day, Blake appeared in my clothing studio. I didn't want to pay attention to him and continued to sort out the clothes in the studio on my own. He walked up to me and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Scarlett, I thought about it all night last night and still came to find you." I stopped what I was doing, looked up at him, and said coldly, "What do you want from me? To remind me not to have any inappropriate thoughts?" His face darkened, and a complicated look welled up in his eyes. "Scarlett, don't say angry words. I know your father intends for you to marry Hector. But getting married is a lifetime thing. You mustn't act impulsively." I raised my eyebrows, stood in front of him with my arms crossed, and said infuriately, "So, Blake, what capacity are you in to give me this advice? The person who was engaged to me in an arranged marriage and once stopped me from liking others? Or the brother who only regards me as a sister?" Blake was taken aback, and his face turned a little ugly. I smiled and looked at him, saying, "Blake, like yet, although I don't like Cecilia. But since you've already chosen her, don't get involved with other women anymore, including me. This is a sign of respect for her and also for me." Blake's eyes darkened a bit. The veins on the back of his hand bulged, and he said gloomily, "Scarlett, do you have to be so rational?" I lowered my head and continued to sort out the clothes at hand, while curling my lips and saying casually, "Well, not always. I can also be irrational sometimes. For example, when facing Hector, this handsome, wealthy, and well-built man who is my potential marriage partner. I think that feelings aren't important at all, and it would be quite good to marry him." Blake's jaw tightened, and he stared at me for a long time without saying a word. After a while, he turned around angrily and walked towards the door. I lifted my eyelids and looked at his departing back. Only then did I realize that Hector had come at some point. He was standing quietly by the door, with a teasing smile on his face. When passing by him, Blake paused for a moment and then pushed the door open and left. Looking at Hector who was walking towards me, I suddenly felt a bit embarrassed and blushed, saying, "I was just joking." "Really?" He walked up to me, squinted his eyes, and said, "Which sentence was a joke?" "The one about being handsome, wealthy, and having a good figure." Or the one about it being quite good to marry him? There was a smile on his lips. And his peach blossom eyes were as bright as stars. People outside said that the president of Shink and was a cold and aloof iceberg. But looking at him now, what kind of cold and aloof iceberg was this? Seeing that I was a bit embarrassed, he stopped teasing me and told me his purpose for coming. He came to make an appointment with me to go to Shink and to discuss the contract. In fact, for such a small matter, there was no need for him, the big president, to come and inform me in person. Unless he purely came up with an excuse to see me. Realizing this, my heart suddenly skipped a beat. With Hector's help, my cooperation with Shinkim was very pleasant. After the award ceremony ended, my MUII customization became popular. However, not long after, the dress I designed for a top-tier celebrity was accused by netizens of plagiarizing someone else's work. I looked at the evidence boasted by the netizens, which were photos of the winning works of an obscure foreign fashion and design competition half a year ago. That winning work was indeed very similar to the dress I designed. What's more unexpected was that the designer of that winning work was actually Cecilia. Before I could react, there was already a flood of abuse towards me on the internet. This was the first time I encountered such a thing after graduating, and I was suddenly a bit panicked. When I opened the studio, I was very determined to rely on my own strength, so naturally, I didn't want to ask my father for help this time either. Just when I was at a loss, Hector came to my studio. When he walked in, I was sitting on the sofa. I looked up at him and couldn't help but explain. I didn't plagiarize. He didn't hesitate and nodded, saying, "I know." Looking at his expression, I knew that he really believed me. It was like a ray of sunshine piercing through the dark clouds. At this moment, my gloomy mood lightened up a bit. This design drawing was completed by me before I graduated. I don't know how it happened to be similar to Cecilia's work, I explained. Hector sat down beside me and asked me softly, "Is it possible that Cecilia has seen your design?" I was taken aback. I had never thought about this before. But since we were in the same dormitory in university, this possibility couldn't be ruled out. Before she participated in the competition, was there anyone else who saw your design? I suddenly had an idea and said excitedly. After I finished drawing the design, I was very satisfied with it and sent it to my tutor to take a look. The chat record should still be there. Take a screenshot for me, and leave the rest to me, Hector said. His deep eyes were calm and composed, and somehow they made me feel at ease. I nodded and said softly, "Thank you." After Hector left, Blake's call came in. "Scarlett, Cecilia didn't expose the plagiarism incident. As long as she doesn't pursue it, this trending topic will pass soon." I was a bit speechless. After a moment of silence, I said coldly, "If it wasn't her, then who else could it be? Such an obscure foreign design competition. And it was the work that won the most controversial excellence award. Is it really such a coincidence that it was noticed by a passerby? Also, heading till Sobwag session. Do you think I plagiarized her work? In your heart, am I that kind of person? But the two works are almost identical." He blurted out. I have known him for more than 20 years. But his understanding and trust in me are even less than those of Hector, who I've only known for a few months. It's really ridiculous. Then is it possible that she plagiarized me? I said. He fell silent on the other end of the phone and didn't speak for a long time. "Blake, you mut out. Don't bother about my business." I originally wanted to hang up the phone like this, but I couldn't help adding a few more words. "Blake, adding fulfilled waves. I think I still need to remind you that Cecilia isn't an ideal partner. Of course. If you don't want to listen, just pretend I didn't say anything. Goodbye." Shinkim was very experienced in dealing with public opinion on the internet. Soon, let out a wall sorry. My earlier design drawings and the chat records that could prove the design time were all over the internet, and even my tutor came out to testify for me. In just a few days, the public opinion took a complete turn. Cecilia changed from an original creator to a plagiarist and became the target of condemnation across the internet, with scolding voices everywhere. The identity of an excellent fashion designer that she had painstakingly created and was active on the internet was now ruined. The future that could have been shining brightly was now covered in dust, and it would be difficult for her to shine again. I didn't continue to pursue her responsibility, but just sent her a text message. Cecilia. Instead of trying hard to set obstacles for others' lives, it's better to focus on your own path. I hope you can take good care of yourself. She didn't reply, but I think she no longer has the ability to cause any more trouble. During this online commotion, the official Weibo account of Shinkin Group has spoken up for me several times. Someone asked in the comment section what the relationship was between Shinkin Group and me, the beautiful designer. The official Weibo account of Shinkin Group personally replied, "The future wife of the president." When I saw this reply, I was completely stunned on the spot. Just as the heat of the plagiarism scandal had just subsided, the gossip about my relationship with him was trending on the internet again. After the online uproar died down, I asked Hector out. He had done me a huge favor, and I definitely had to express my gratitude to him. The place Hector chose was a well-known Western restaurant by the riverside in the capital city. The stars in the night sky were reflected on the sparkling surface of the river. When the gentle breeze blew, ripples spread out on the water, just like my heart at this moment. Sitting in front of him, thinking of that sentence on his Weibo, I just couldn't calm down. But the person in front of me had no intention of explaining at all. Finally, I couldn't hold back and asked him, "Hector, that sentence on Weibo." Hearing this, he looked up and quietly waited for me to continue. I gritted my teeth and blurted out, "Why did the official Weibo say that I'm the future wife of the president of Shinkin Group?" The corners of his lips curved slightly. "Regarding this arranged marriage, both your father and I agreed to it. You yourself also said that it would be quite good to marry me. So, it's only a matter of time before you become the future wife of the president of Shinkin Group." I was just joking when I said that, but I took it seriously. He raised his eyebrows and smiled, with a twinkle in his eyes. "The words have already been said. You surely wouldn't want me to be laughed at by the whole internet, would you?" I was slightly stunned and then shook my head. "Then it's a deal." There was a smile on his lips, with a hint of triumph. I felt as if I was walking step by step into the trap he had set. However, for some inexplicable reason, I was willing to do so. On the night when the news of my arranged marriage with Hector was announced, I met Blake at my doorstep. He stood under the street lamp, looking dejected. When he saw me, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he walked quickly towards me. "Scarlett, is there something wrong?" I asked him. My tone was polite and distant, just like that of a stranger I had just met. He stared intently into my eyes and said, "Scarlett, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you." I smiled faintly and said, "After you got together with Cecilia, there were many things you didn't believe about me." "I don't know which one you're referring to." "Every single one." He took a step closer to me, frowning tightly. I finally realized that Cecilia's simplicity, kindness, strength, and independence were all fake. She's scheming and used many tricks just to take me away from you. Even our acquaintance was carefully planned by her. I broke up with her. I'm sorry that I didn't believe what you said before." I looked into his dark eyes and let out a soft laugh. "Blake, you said that you and I weren't really engaged. So there was no such thing as taking you away. Have you forgotten? Also, whether you break up with her or stay with her has nothing to do with me. You'd better go back early." There was nothing more to talk about with him, so I turned to leave. But he called out to me excitedly, "Scarlett, are you really going to marry Hector? Even if he has a first love in his heart and doesn't like you? Are you still going to marry him?" I didn't stop walking forward, but his words still reached my ears. He has a first love in his heart that he has never been able to let go of. If you don't believe me, you can ask others. That night, I curled up on the sofa with my legs bent and searched for news about the president of Shinkin Group. Since I started getting along with Hector, I thought he liked me. And I, seemingly without realizing it, had already fallen for him. But what Blake said just now still made me feel restless. As I scrolled through my phone, I suddenly found an interview video of Hector. On the video, he admitted personally that he had a girl he liked very much in high school, and she was still in his heart. My mood instantly dropped. If he had a first love in his heart, then what was I? A suitable candidate who compromises for the sake of harmony. A second-choice substitute? Half a month later, the engagement banquet was held as scheduled. During this period, I wanted to ask him about his first love several times. But I finally didn't bring it up. After all, my marriage with him was an arranged one between our families, not a union based on love. So, it didn't seem like a wrong thing that he didn't like me. But I still lost my enthusiasm for this arranged marriage because of it. However, he took it very seriously. He not only personally selected the hotel for the engagement banquet, but also specially found a designer from Italy to design our engagement rings. On the night of the engagement, Hector had a smile on his face and was in a very good mood. When he put the ring on my finger, his hands were even shaking with excitement. If I didn't know that he had a first love in his heart, I would definitely think that he loved me. After the ceremony, I went upstairs to the room alone to change out of my wedding dress. When I came out, I was blocked by Blake in the corridor of the hotel. His eyes were red, and he gritted his teeth, looking like a wounded wolf. All his former charm and pride were gone. "Scarlett." He called my name, his voice trembling slightly, as if filled with endless pain. "I really can't bear to watch you marry someone else." I touched the engagement ring on my hand and smiled at him. "Don't be kidding. Blake. Didn't you regard me as your younger sister? You should be happy that your sister is engaged." I was wrong. Blake held my shoulders and pressed me against the wall, pleading. "Scarlett. Please don't marry someone else. Come back to me. Okay?" "Blake, let go. Do you even know what you're saying?" I said with a stern face. A month ago, the person he had his heart set on was still Cecilia. It hadn't been long since he broke up with her. And now he was saying these things to me? What kind of scumbag was he? I said. "I like you," Blake said excitedly. "Scarlett. I thought I liked someone like Cecilia. But every time I saw you with Hector, I felt really uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just possessiveness. But just now, when I saw you exchange engagement rings with him, I realized that I really couldn't live without you. Blake, don't you think it's a bit ridiculous for you to say these things to me at my engagement banquet? Do you think I'll break off the engagement for you?" I was simply speechless. "But you've always wanted to marry me, haven't you?" He grabbed my arm, and his fingertips were slightly trembling. Blake let out a low sigh. "So you knew that?" I smiled sarcastically. "You knew that I had always been looking forward to the day when I could wear a wedding dress for you. But what did you do? Didn't you say you regarded me as your younger sister? Didn't you say that Cecilia was more suitable for you, and asked me to put away those thoughts that I shouldn't have?" "Blake, I'm not like you. Once I make a choice, I won't change it easily. Now that I've decided to have an arranged marriage with Hector, even if there's no love between us, I'll grit my teeth and go through with it and never look back." Hearing this, Blake's face instantly turned pale, losing all its color. Belated affection is cheaper than grass. I pushed him away forcefully and walked away straight. I didn't see Blake for the rest of the engagement banquet. Presumably, he had already left. After I said those words to him just now, his eyes were filled with uncontrollable regret and sadness. In all the years I had known him, it was the first time I saw him like this. However, the person who would give him comfort and support would no longer be me. After the dinner party ended, the elders were very considerate and left Hector and me to stay overnight at the hotel. I mentally prepared myself for a long time and finally accepted it with great reluctance. Since I had already agreed to the engagement, everything was just a matter of time. However, when he came out of the bathroom, I was so nervous that I felt like I was about to fall apart. He was wrapped in a bathrobe, with a few strands of slightly wet hair falling on his forehead, looking a bit less indifferent and aloof than usual. In the soft light, he was really attractive. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and instantly my heart started beating faster. But he didn't make any move for a long time. Finally, having fulfilledly, he let out a sigh and sat down on the sofa. My heart immediately sank. Was he sighing because he thought I couldn't compare to his first love? The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. So, I simply ignored him. wrapped myself tightly in the quilt, and went to sleep. That night, he lay on the sofa and seemed not to have slept all night. I slept soundly. But in my dream, it seemed that someone gently kissed my face. When I woke up the next day, he had already washed up and dressed neatly. He was sitting on the sofa, looking at me deeply. "Scarlett." He suddenly called my name, his voice hoarse. "Or, let's call off our engagement." I sat on the bed and thought I had misheard him. We had just committed to each other in front of our relatives and friends, and the news of our engagement was still trending on the internet. And now he was telling me to call off the engagement? I was a bit angry. I lifted the quilt, got out of bed, and walked up to him. "Hector, do you take the engagement as a joke?" He stood up, picked up the slippers beside him, and bent down to gently put them on my feet. He looked so gentle and attentive, as if I was the one he held dear in his heart. The words that I had wanted to ask but was too afraid to ask several times before the engagement finally came out of my mouth. "Hector, can't you really let go of your first love?" "First love?" He looked puzzled. "I know you liked a girl in high school and still haven't forgotten her. Right?" I tried my best to act as if I didn't care, but my slightly trembling voice betrayed my feelings. He was stunned for a few seconds. Then the corners of his lips curved up, and his peach blossom eyes were filled with a smile. "Well, I can't let her go." "Then why did you still get engaged to me?" I said angrily. His obsidian-like eyes were filled with a gentle light as he looked at me intently and chuckled. "Scarlett, don't you really remember me?" I was stunned. "The Chinese parasol tree at Jingji Middle School," he said. A beautiful smile spread across his handsome face, and some memories came flooding back. At that moment, I finally understood why I had always felt that he looked familiar. I finally remembered that young man from many years ago. The first time I met him was under the Chinese parasol tree on campus. It was during my sophomore year of high school. I was going to perform a violin solo at the school's art festival. Every evening, I would go to the quietest and most secluded corner of the campus, which was under that Chinese parasol tree, to practice. That day, I was playing the violin there as usual. But a voice came from the tree. "You played the third sentence of the second paragraph out of tune." I was really scared. Then I saw a clear and handsome young man jump down from the tree. "Sorry for scaring you." He apologized to me and also guided me on how to play that part well. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to ask for his name that day. Then Blake came and called me to go home together. After that time, I oft and deliberately ran into you on the road. Later, when I found out that you had an engagement with Blake, I was disappointed for a long time, and that's why I never bothered you. It wasn't until I met you again at Shinken that I couldn't help asking about your current situation. Then I knew that you weren't actually with him. And that's why. So, heading so blind sour. You recognized me, and then went to my father and proposed the marriage alliance? I was shocked. Hector smiled slightly and nodded gently. A huge wave of joy welled up from the bottom of my heart. It turned out that the person Hector liked, his long-cherished first love, was me. The corners of my lips couldn't help but turn up. But then I remembered what he had just said and asked in confusion. "Then why were you so cold to me last night? And why did you say we should forget about the engagement just now?" The faint smile on his face disappeared, and there was a look of loneliness in his eyes. "I heard what you said to Blake last night. You said that the person you once expected to marry was him. And you also said that there was no love between us." It turned out that I wasn't the only one who was worried about losing and was filled with wild thoughts. After all, neither he nor I had expressed our true feelings. And we had rushed into the engagement stage, which was why we lacked confidence in each other. "Hector." I looked up at him and said seriously. "Blake and I were engaged in an arranged marriage when we were children. So I always thought I would marry him when I grew up. However, we were never really together. Many things happened later, which made me give up on him and also made me realize that he wasn't my ideal partner." Hector's eyes were bottomless black, as if some emotions were surging inside. I took a deep breath and gathered my courage to continue. "The person I want to marry now is the one who believes in me unconditionally no matter what others say. The one who stands up to help me the moment I encounter difficulties. And the one who has already made my heart flutter without my realizing it, you. He was slightly stunned. And joy gradually welled up in his eyes. Scarlett. Is what you said true? I lowered my head and felt a bit embarrassed. Saying, I've been a bit cold to you these days because I thought you liked someone else. As soon as I finished speaking, he hugged me tightly in his arms. And his thin lips were close to my ear. Saying, I like you, Scarlett. The person I like is you. I put my hands on his chest and gently pushed him away a bit. Looking at him, I smiled softly and said, Then should we still forget about the engagement? He pinched my chin and lifted it up, gritting his teeth and saying, Don't even think about it. In this life, you just stay by my side properly and don't even think about running away. The morning sunlight shone through the gaps in the curtains and fell on us who were hugging tightly, adding a bit of charm and romance. 2 months after the engagement, I met Blake at a fashion show. He looked haggard and somewhat decadent. I knew that he and Cecilia had been making a big mess on the internet recently. Cecilia accused Blake of playing with her feelings and abandoning her, while Blake angrily criticized Cecilia for being a scheming woman. The two of them tore each other apart on the internet and became a laughingstock among people in the circle for a while. After the plagiarism incident last time, Cecilia's career was already in a difficult situation, and now it was even worse. Blake's situation wasn't much better either. He not only lost face in front of the public but also was punished by the company's board of directors. After the fashion show ended, Blake walked up to me and called my name softly, Scarlett. I was chatting with Hector on WeChat, and there was still a smile in my eyes. When I heard Blake's voice, I looked up. The smile in my eyes hadn't completely faded, and I nodded at him inferently. Are you happy now? He asked cautiously, his voice low and hoarse. I didn't say anything. But I think the look of happiness and the smile on my face when I was looking down at my phone to send a message just now had already given him the answer. He was silent for a long time. And finally he spoke again. Scarlett. Actually, I've always liked you. But you made me feel so inferior that I didn't dare to face my own feelings. I was a bit surprised and didn't understand why Blake suddenly opened up his heart to me. But I still listened quietly. You have a good family background, a beautiful appearance, and great abilities. And I even had to rely on your help to solve the crisis of my company. You must look down on me, right? His eyes were red, and his expression was fragile as he spoke. I've always been unsure whether you liked me or just pitied me. I didn't feel any dignity as a man when I was with you at all. I was slightly stunned. Over the years, I had no idea that he had such thoughts. So, you'd rather be with Cecilia? Because she's willing to look up to you from a lower position and can satisfy your pride and self-esteem? I finally understood everything. But the motives and reasons behind it were still hard for me to comprehend. Sorry, Scarlett. I was wrong. Now I'd rather lose my dignity and pride than lose you. He reached out his hand, seemingly wanting to hold mine, but stopped just before touching it. Even though he knew it was impossible, he still asked in a trembling voice, Can't you really give me another chance? I remembered when I was young. I sat on the back seat of his bicycle countless times, watching the wind blow up the corners of his white shirt, and my heart was full of tender expectations of walking along with him. I once liked him seriously. But later, those feelings had all turned into dust and dissipated in the wind. At this moment, looking at his slightly wet eyes, I felt no ripples in my heart. Blake, et in so sorry. Actually, over all these years, I've never looked down on you even once. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been so persistent in waiting for you to marry me. Maybe the appearance of Cecilia isn't a bad thing. She made us realize that you and I aren't suitable for each other. I smiled at him calmly and said softly, Now, I've found the right person for me. I hope you can also find your true right one soon. Blake's tightly pursed lips trembled. And he didn't say anything more. Before he turned around and left, I clearly saw a tear roll down from the corner of his eye. Looking at his back, I softly said goodbye to him in my heart. A new message came to my phone. It was from Hector. He had come to pick me up. I looked up and saw him walking towards me with a smile on his face through the surging crowd leaving the venue. I smiled and walked towards him, towards my tomorrow, and towards my happiness. Extra chapter. One day, I came across a piece of gossip exposed by an employee of Shinkan. The gossip said that Hector, the president of Shinkan, once gave his first love a high-end customized violin bow. Until now, the matching violin was still placed in the display cabinet in his office. I did see a violin in his office. But when did he give me a violin bow? I called him. On the other end of the phone, he chuckled softly and said, during the art festival in the second year of high school. The memories came flooding back. During the school art festival that year, my performance was a violin solo. After I started performing on stage, I realized that there was something wrong with my violin bow. The sound of the violin I played was hoarse and harsh, just like the sound of sawing wood. There was a burst of laughter from the audience, and I froze on the stage not knowing what to do. At that time, someone handed a violin bow from the audience, which helped me out of the predicament. My violin solo that day was wonderful, and finally I won warm applause. After getting off the stage, since I couldn't find the owner of the violin bow, I had to take it home. So many years had passed, and that violin bow was still well preserved in my room. Until today, I just knew that the owner of that violin bow was actually Hector. On our wedding night, I took that violin bow to the bridal chamber and placed it together with his violin. He hugged me from behind and whispered in my ear, "Actually, hadn't so stelbled Sasho." This was a customized 18th birthday gift from my mother when I was abroad. I've always cherished it. Then why did you give it to me? I smiled. At that time, I thought that if I couldn't be with you, then let my violin bow and your violin fulfill my dream of being together instead of me. I turned around, put my arms around his neck, and blinked my eyes, saying, "What should I do? I think you're a bit silly. But I like it so much. Hector, thank you for coming into my life. And I love you." He looked at me, his eyes as dark as ink. The next second, his kiss landed on my lips, blocking my mouth firmly. His lips and teeth were warm and lingering. All his usual indifference and calmness were gone, and he was so passionate that he almost melted me. That night, the spring scenery was boundless, and it was full of tenderness and affection. This iceberg president, who was rumored to be cold, aloof, and indifferent to women, burned with passion for me throughout the whole spring night. The end of the full text.